Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well, happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today on Critter Chat, we're going to talk about an animal that nearly all people in the world are familiar with in some point because they are very personable, they're very prevalent, and they're very common throughout much of the world. Today we're talking about squirrels. There are over 260 species of squirrels around the world, and they live on both North and South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. They also live in a few of the islands of Southeast Asia, but they don't go as far as Australia. No squirrels in Australia, and no squirrels in Antarctica. And then same with most of the islands throughout the middle of the ocean, like Polynesian islands, they don't really have squirrels either. Squirrels are mammals, so that means their bodies are covered with hair, they give live birth, they feed their babies milk, all those good things. They are also in the group of animals called rodents, and squirrels actually make up a big chunk of the rodent group of animals. Like all rodents, they have 4 very big teeth, 2 on top, 2 on bottom at the front of their mouth, that never stop growing. They use those teeth, called incisors, to continually chew and gnaw on a wide variety of things. They evolved to have this adaptation because they eat a lot of very hard, woody food sources, things like nuts. They'll chew on bark, they'll eat pine cones. And so these big sharp teeth that never stop growing help them to be able to chew through a lot of those harder substances. So that is called gnawing. They are also omnivores. They eat various parts of various types of trees and vegetation. Typically, though, they're eating like the bark and the twigs, not necessarily like the leaves. They do like to eat flowers. They love to eat seeds and nuts. And they love to eat fruits off of trees. So when we say fruit, we often think of something like an apple that we grow. There are also fruits on plants that people don't really eat that are ways for the plant to regenerate or grow new plants, and they'll eat a lot of those. I'll show you some of those here in a minute. We're gonna take a little walk around my yard and see what the squirrels in my yard have been eating at the end of the Critter Chat today. They will also sometimes eat some other animals. That largely is insects, things like grasshoppers, caterpillars of butterflies, things that they catch kind of up and around as they're roaming around. And occasionally they'll go after some other small animals, things like small birds, eggs, lizards, other things that may be really close by to them. Most squirrels are very opportunistic, and they'll eat a wide variety of different things. Now, there are 3 main types of squirrels. And first, the ones that most people think of are called tree squirrels. They live up in the trees. And even though they're tree squirrels, sometimes they come down to the ground. These are squirrels that are excellent climbers. They typically will sleep up in the tree, even if they come down to the ground to look for their food. Tree squirrels are the most common type of squirrels. These are the squirrels you may see in like parks, in cities, in backyards. The squirrels that I have here at my yard are tree squirrels. And there are 122 species of tree squirrels around the world. There's a lot of them that live in the tropics, in like rainforest kind of settings. There are also many squirrels that live across much of like the United States and Canada. Most of these are also tree squirrels. Closely related to them are their cousins that are still in the squirrel family called ground squirrels. Ground squirrels are really good at digging. They dig elaborate burrows, sometimes very, very big connected with a very social group. So I know in Arizona when I lived there, we had a lot of ground squirrels that lived there called rock squirrels. They were pretty common. And that's what I first thought of when I was researching this. I'm like, oh, ground squirrels, like the rock squirrels. And that's true, but it also includes some animals that you don't necessarily think of as squirrels. I remember when I was a kid, when we would go camping, and my brothers and I, we would see little squirrels or chipmunks, and we would argue sometimes for hours if it was a squirrel, if it was a chipmunk. Comes to find out, chipmunks are types of squirrels. They're types of ground squirrels. So are some other things, including prairie dogs and marmots. If you don't know what a marmot is, you might know what a groundhog is. They're the same animal. There's several different species. They live mostly in North America throughout a wide variety of habitat. Kind of in the eastern states, they call them groundhogs. In the western states, they call them marmots. But they're the same types of animals, but they are also a type of squirrel. They are huge. They get like this big, like 2 feet in length. Prairie dogs, yeah, are also a type of squirrel. And if you think about little ground squirrels that you may see, sometimes they look kind of like prairie dogs. They have a shorter tail. They live in kind of a community. So it kind of makes sense when you start really thinking about it, but it's not super common to associate a prairie dog as being a squirrel. You usually think of squirrels as big bushy tails, and that's the tree squirrels. The third group of squirrels are flying squirrels. I've happened to see a few flying squirrels throughout my lifetime. Most of them have been in like a zoo or a nature setting kind of situation. I've seen one in the wild once. Flying squirrels are super cool. They don't actually fly. But they do jump from branch to branch, and in between their arms and their legs, they have a nice fur cape that's extended skin that's covered in fur that helps them glide. So if you've ever seen people who do base jumping in squirrel suits, that's what it's patterned after, is flying squirrels. So they kind of jump and they have this built-in parachute that kind of slows them down as they move from one tree to another. There are 42 species of flying squirrels around the planet. They live in a wide variety of different places. There are some here in North America, but most of the flying squirrels live in more of a tropical setting. Most flying squirrels are a bit smaller. They tend to be a little more skittish or scared of humans, so they don't typically get seen as much. And unlike the ground squirrels and tree squirrels, flying squirrels sometimes are a little more nocturnal, so you don't see them out in the daytime as much. With their gliding from one tree to another tree, on average, they can go about 150 feet. Some of the bigger species can go over 300 feet on a single glide. There's a flying squirrel that lives in China that is very large and can make those big glides between very tall trees. So the word for the squirrel family, the Latin word, is called Sciuridae, which is Latin or Greek, or I guess it's Greek. I don't know if I pronounced it right. I probably didn't. But it comes from two Greek words that mean shadow and tail. And so the tree squirrels really represent that they have that big bushy tail. And sometimes you can see a squirrel's shadow and know what it is immediately by that big bushy tail, especially if they're the tree squirrels. The smallest type of squirrel is called the African pygmy squirrel. It is only about this big with a little tiny tail. So it's only 5 inches from tip to tail, and it weighs about an ounce total. So really tiny little squirrel. The largest squirrel is called the Indian giant squirrel. It can weigh about 5 pounds, and it is 36 inches in length. I'll be posting some information about them later on today on the Facebook page. They're also super colorful, which is kind of the case with a lot of the squirrels that come from warmer, even tropical areas. They sometimes are really bright colored. Most of the squirrels in like the US that we see are usually like gray, brown, or kind of reddish color. Although there are also some black ones and some white ones. Those are actually usually genetic mutations of the brown, gray, and reddish colored squirrels. Squirrels are typically diurnal or daytime, so they're very active in the daytime. I know the squirrels here at my yard wake up shortly after the sun. They start looking for food. During this time of year when it's pretty hot, they usually kind of rest for a bit of the time. It's about 90 degrees here right now, so I don't see any moving around, but we'll see if we can find them. I'll show you where they like to hang out here in a bit. We're gonna walk around my yard and take a look, see if we can find some squirrels. But they spend most of their day foraging. So in a hot place like LA in July, they're gonna be more crepuscular, or morning and afternoon. They're gonna be more active during those times. Middle of the day, they're gonna take a little rest. Most squirrels that we typically think of as squirrels in the United States, they eat about 1 pound of food per squirrel per week. So they need to eat quite a bit, and sometimes what they're eating is just this much of something that's actually this big. So they also kind of drop a lot of things. They throw a lot of parts away that they don't eat, and they sometimes make pretty big messes, which we'll also be seeing here in a minute. Tree squirrels don't hibernate, so the ones with bushy tails don't. During the winter time, they usually have stashed a bunch of food during the rest of the year called caches, and they kind of move from one place to another place where they have stored food, and they will kind of go throughout their range looking for that food to make sure that they have enough food to get them through the winter. The ground squirrels do typically hibernate. Some of them will just stay underground depending on what they're doing. Some of them actually go into a very relaxed sleep state. They slow down all their metabolism, their heartbeat, their breathing, all of that good stuff. Some are awake during the winter time, but stay kind of more underground and have stored some food under that as well. In warm places like Los Angeles, there's no need for them to hibernate. It's pretty good, mild temperatures year-round, so they're active year-round. I see them quite a bit. I probably see squirrels every day in my yard. I have at least 2 that nest in the yard. I believe one's a male, one's a female. They've had babies. So at times of the year, we have like 8 or 10 in our yard. As well as the neighbors also have more squirrels, so they sometimes come over to my yard as well. Some of the ground squirrels are super good at communicating, particularly the prairie dogs. There's a researcher who did some prairie dog research and helped to start decoding prairie dog language. Found out that they have specific sounds for different types of predators for alarm calls, kind of like monkeys. So sometimes they are very smart. Tree squirrels have a little less language, but they do have a couple different sounds, and you can sometimes hear those. I know they make a very softer sound when they're trying to maybe see if the other squirrels are interested in having some baby squirrels together. They make a very soft kind of laughing sound that's really quite cute. Whereas if they're angry at something like my dogs or me, they'll make a very chattering sound and kind of let it be known that they're in the area and try to scare us off. The tree squirrels also have very sharp claws. They're very good at climbing. They have 5 digits, both front feet or on their feet and on their hands. That allows them to grab. And they have a kind of a thumb. It's not quite as good as our thumb, but they can grab things and hold them pretty well. And they do that often when they are hunting for their food. One of the squirrels that I have seen quite often in a zoo is a squirrel from Southeast Asia called the Prevost squirrel. It's black and white and red, so it's very brightly colored. I was looking up a little bit about them because I have seen them in multiple zoos, and they did have them at the Los Angeles Zoo where I worked. And I was studying up on those, and they said that they can live up to 15 years in human care, which seems like a really long time for a rodent That's definitely longer than something like a hamster, a guinea pig, a mouse, a rat, any of those. So I think squirrels can live quite a bit longer. Although some of the bigger rodent species can also be kind of in that same age range. Things like beavers, porcupines, probably a capybara can all live kind of into the double digits for sure. So squirrels are kind of on that longer living side of the spectrum. In warm climates, the squirrels can sometimes have 2 litters of babies a year, with typically between like 3 to 5 babies at a time. And then the babies are kind of out and on their own within about 3 to 4 months. And then mom can have another litter of babies. Most tree squirrels are solitary. So in my yard, the mom squirrel has a nest back here in my backyard. I believe it's a dad squirrel that has a nest up in the front yard. They do come together on occasion, and there's definitely squirrels from the neighbors that come in from time to time. With most squirrels are listed as least concern. They're not very threatened or endangered. There are a handful, though, that are vulnerable, and a handful that are endangered, or a couple that are considered critically endangered. I'm going to talk just briefly about those. One of those is one of the marmots, so the big groundhog guys that live underground that come out. And it lives up in Canada, called the Vancouver Island marmot. So as the word island is in there, it lives on just a small space of land. So it already had a small limited range. And where it lives, that area has been logged quite a bit, and there's a lot of predators with not a lot of prey. So unfortunately, the marmots have been getting eaten by a lot of predators. They are listed as critically endangered. I know several zoos have been working on breeding programs to try to get their numbers back up and find ways to reintroduce them into the wild. I'll see if I can find a video or something that summarizes that story to share later on the Facebook page. There's also a prairie dog species that's endangered. There's, I believe, 5 different species of prairie dogs. The Mexican prairie dog is vulnerable, and the prairie dog called the Utah prairie dog is listed as endangered. So they have had a wide variety of problems, some of which has been drought. Ground squirrels, like prairie dogs, mostly eat grass. And so if it's a bad year with little to no water, the grass doesn't grow as much. There's not nearly as much food. Also, some squirrels are widely affected by human use. If we cut down the trees and they're tree squirrels, they have no forest to live in. If there's wildfires that burn through a lot of their area, that sometimes burns up their food sources and sometimes their homes where they live. Our special shout out today is to the Phoenix Zoo, who is one of my former employers. Right at the end of my time at the Phoenix Zoo, they were just getting involved in a program with a very rare squirrel that lives only in Arizona, kind of only on one mountain in Arizona, called the Mount Graham red squirrel. It lives in very southern Arizona, kind of south and a little bit east of the city of Tucson. It is listed as endangered and has been listed as endangered since June of 1987. That's kind of when they first figured out that genetically this was its own species, although it's related to other red squirrels in parts of the Four Corners state, so Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. The Mount Graham red squirrel is of very special concern because a few years ago it got down to numbers in the 30s. There were only about 35 of them left out in the wild. And the Phoenix Zoo is playing a very important role in figuring out how to take care of them in a captive setting. They have several who live at the zoo in their conservation building, and they are working to try to figure out ways to breed them in a captive setting. To my knowledge and what I could find online, they have not yet successfully had baby Mount Graham red squirrels at the Phoenix Zoo, although they are hopeful that that can happen in the coming years. Mount Graham red squirrels' window of breeding is only about 8 hours out of the year, so it's a very limited time frame, And the squirrels don't typically like each other, so only during breeding season would they come together, and that breeding season is 8 hours in the year, so very short window of opportunity for breeding. I also have a good video from Arizona Game and Fish that will be talking a little bit about the efforts to save the squirrels on the mountain where they live in southern Arizona. All right, so now we're gonna go a little bit in my backyard and look at some of the squirrel areas of my backyard, see what we can find. I'm gonna switch the camera around, take a few steps back. So I have a very, very large eucalyptus tree, and up there about halfway up, kind of in this area right there, is a squirrel nest. So I often see the squirrels coming in and out of that area where there's kind of a bunch of big branches that come together, and they have kind of some leaves and sticks and things put together. And I think this is the mom squirrel that lives back here, because I often see more squirrels in this tree than any others. Now that's a eucalyptus tree, and it's a very big tree, but that tree doesn't have any food for them. They don't eat anything that's eucalyptus, but it's a big tree that provides nice shelter. So as we come back down and around this way in my yard, these trees are orange trees. And although there's just tiny little oranges growing on them right now, the squirrels love to eat my oranges. So this time of year, there's not really much for them to eat. You can see some little oranges just starting out there. But this time of year, not so much food for them to eat. As we kind of come around this way, I have a little dead pine tree right here. Or it's not totally dead, but it's almost dead from getting clipped by the wires. Oh, the squirrels will use the wires too as a highway system to get to this side of the yard. This tree right here is called a loquat tree. It gets small fruits on it that are kind of similar to an apricot in size. The squirrels love loquats. Loquats are typically ripe in like February and March. So this time of year, there's nothing for them to eat there. Although when this tree has ripe fruit on it, they are very adamant about trying to eat everything that grows there. Over here, I have a little peach tree. I've lived in this house for 6 years. I have not yet gotten a peach off of this tree because the squirrels always pull them off and eat them before they are ever anywhere close to being ripe. I don't think there's any peaches left at this point, so the squirrels usually pick it clean. Oh, there's a little tiny one. Let's see if I can find it. Right there is a little baby peach, but that one's probably so small it won't ever grow into anything big. So right now, what the squirrels in my yard are eating are these guys. These are pomegranates. So here in my backyard, I have 6 pomegranate trees. You can see some nice pomegranates growing here. And the squirrels every day right now are picking the pomegranates off. Sometimes they don't eat very much, like this one. They just managed to make it fall off. Didn't really eat anything. But you can see right here up on the fence, this is one they picked possibly today, maybe yesterday. But I cleaned up the yard yesterday morning, so this is in the last 24 hours that they picked and ate that pomegranate. And although the pomegranates are nowhere near ripe, they are doing a very good job at destroying them and eating them. So luckily this year we have a lot of pomegranates, so we still have quite a few on the trees. And the pomegranates are not the only food source for the squirrels. So we're gonna take a little walk over here. Sorry if I'm making anyone dizzy. This is along the side of my house, headed up towards the front yard. And this part's a little messy. For that, I apologize. In my front yard, I have 2 very large, like 85-foot tall pine trees. And in the pine trees, there is definitely another squirrel nest. We can often hear the squirrels run up and down the trees, kind of in the morning and in the afternoon. And then this time of year, the squirrels are really looking for these guys. So these are the pine cones that grow on my tree. That's it compared to my hand, so you kind of have an idea for size. And this one, the squirrels knocked down. They didn't really eat much of that one. But this one, they do quite a good number of eating that. As they eat the trees, they make a really big mess. So you can see shelled pine cones all over the ground here. I sweep this up usually twice a week. So this has been like 3 days worth here. Yeah, so the squirrels like to make a pretty big mess. So no squirrels out visible right now. Like I said, it's about 90 degrees. So it's kind of their time where they take a little break and find a cool spot. Oh, here's more evidence of them eating pomegranates. So they really do quite a number and make a big mess when they eat pomegranates. Just across this fence right here, the neighbors have a grapevine growing. And during my critter chat last week, I saw a squirrel pull a whole bunch of little baby grapes, not even ripe yet, off of there and eat all the grapes. So they are very, very well adapted to eating a bunch of the fruit that we grow here in our yards and neighborhoods. So that kind of sometimes makes them a pest species. The squirrels here in Los Angeles, the ones in my neighborhood at least, are called eastern fox squirrels. They were introduced from the east coast of the United States. People thought they were cute, and so they brought them west. They released them into parks. And here in Southern California, the eastern fox squirrel, and in Northern California, the eastern gray squirrel have really kind of taken over in a lot of the suburban city parks, that kind of area. We do have native squirrels that live here in California as well. The photo I posted earlier today of a very big fluffy gray squirrel, that is a western gray squirrel that was taken in Yosemite National Park last year. That guy's a huge squirrel, and they typically don't live in areas close to people. So as people move into an area, those guys usually move out. They live more in forested areas and in places where there aren't a lot of people. They don't like a lot of people. And maybe I don't blame them. There's also some ground squirrels that live in different places. I know when I worked at the LA Zoo, we had a lot of rock squirrels who lived on the property at the zoo, and the rock squirrels would occasionally try to steal a wide variety of different types of food for the different animals that we were feeding at the zoo. So it's always an interesting challenge. And although squirrels often steal a lot of food from people, they're notorious for raiding like backyard bird feeders and clearly eating fruit and other crops that people grow in their yards for off of trees or grapes or what be it. By and large, squirrels are tolerated a lot more than other animals that are deemed as pests. So we tolerate squirrels kind of more than we tolerate rats or mice or pigeons or gophers. And I think it is because squirrels are, one, really smart, and two, pretty cute. So I think they're tolerated a lot more than other potential pest animals typically are viewed. I did read some information. If you have squirrels that are eating your stuff, ways to try to prevent them or deter them include putting like a metal band around the base of your tree so that they can't climb up it, and then trimming all the branches back at least 6 feet from any other structure. My yard's kind of too small to do that. If I were to trim everything back 6 feet from like the fence and the power lines in my house and everything else, I would have very skinny little trees. And then I like the look of having a more full, lush yard. So I'm gonna keep my trees the way they are and just try to deal with the squirrels that way. The previous owners of this house did try something else where they had little cloth pouches that they had put in some sort of carnivore fur and some sort of scent that they would spray on them, and they tied them in all the trees. They look like little tea bags hanging in all the trees. I wasn't a big fan of those, and I don't think they worked very well, so I took those down when we moved in. But yeah, squirrels are very interesting. I have some really fun stuff to share about squirrels that I'll be putting up on the Facebook page later today. Some interesting stuff about conservation, some interesting things zoos are doing with squirrels or marmots or prairie dogs or other animals related to that. And also some really stuff about how clever and smart squirrels are. There's a really cool video that I'll be sharing around that. So check that out later today on the Facebook page. So that concludes what I have to share about squirrels today. I hope you've enjoyed it and had some fun learning a little more about squirrels. As always, if you have questions, you can type them up in the comments once this video gets posted online on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook, or on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. And feel free to share, like, follow, and subscribe to all of my content across the different channels. And until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun. Bye.